My Kindle had just died, which felt less like losing a gadget and more like putting down a family pet. It had survived drops, spills, and at least one bathtub incident before giving up mid-sentence. Desperate, I borrowed my wife's Samsung tablet, a device so old and slow it could probably qualify for Social Security. So there I was, in the hospital cafeteria, a place where despair and Jell-O are served with equal frequency. I wasn't on shift yet, but I'd just come from a multi-car accident, 4 hours of chaos, all while wearing jeans and a t-shirt that now smelled like someone had wrung them out in stress. My only plan was to sit, sip my coffee, and read. That's when a little boy appeared at my elbow. "Do you have games on your iPad?" he asked, eyes wide with hope. "It's not an iPad," I said, as if that mattered. "Just books." His face crumpled like I'd told him Santa had gone bankrupt. He drifted off, leaving me briefly proud of having defended the honor of literature. Hospitals are funny like that. You walk in for coffee, and suddenly you're cast in a morality play about technology, parenting, and the universal tragedy of not having Angry Birds installed. I went back to reading until my phone buzzed 5 minutes before I had to head upstairs. I dashed for a refill, leaving the tablet on my jacket. Harmless enough, I thought. After all, who steals in a hospital? When I returned, the tablet was gone. If you've ever checked your pockets 10 times, each time expecting magic, you know the feeling. But this wasn't magic. This was theft. Across the room, I spotted the boy with his mother, clutching my tablet in its cartoon case. Relief washed over me. This would be easy. Polite explanation, awkward smile, tablet returned. Except it wasn't. The boy clutched the tablet tighter, his mother smiling but caught in a language barrier that turned my explanation into interpretive dance. Just when it looked solvable, the father arrived. 5'4" of fury, finger jabbing, voice booming. "My son is not a thief, you leave." He said it over and over like it was the chorus of his favorite song. Occasionally, he spiced it up with racist. I stayed calm. My voice was low, my hands at my sides. All I wanted was my property, but in his mind, I wasn't a tired guy in a cafeteria. I was the villain in a drama he was determined to win. Then came security. For one hopeful second, I thought the nightmare was over. But no, this guard happened to share their language. They launched into rapid-fire Hindi, nodding like old friends, while I stood there like a badly cast extra. Finally the guard turned to me. "Step aside, let them leave." Or police. Something in me snapped. Maybe it was the smug look on the father's face, or maybe just the bad coffee. I called the supervisor Dave, an ex-cop with no patience for idiocy. Within minutes, the family was intercepted at the exit. By then, the father had raised the stakes. He yanked the tablet from his son and hurled it to the ground, shattering it. Not just theft anymore, performance art. The police came, the cameras were checked, charges filed. Hours later, I finally returned to work, drained but vindicated. My wife eventually got a replacement tablet, far nicer than the old one. The family's lawyer asked if I'd write a letter calling it a cultural misunderstanding. I declined. Theft is theft, whether in English, Hindi, or mime. In the end, I bought myself another Kindle. Just books, no games. Hopefully boring enough to keep the next entitled dad away. My phone buzzed with its little 5-minute alarm, which I usually treat like an overly dramatic stage manager. Wrap it up? The next act is about to begin. I decided to grab one last refill of coffee, leaving the tablet on my jacket. At the time, it felt harmless. Who steals in a hospital? Everyone here has bigger worries: illness, paperwork, and whatever that smell is coming from the cafeteria's soup station. When I came back, coffee in hand, the tablet was gone. I checked my pockets as though the thing might have slipped inside on its own, like a cat sneaking into a grocery bag. Nothing. I looked under the chair, then on top of the chair, then God help me under my jacket, as if the tablet had suddenly learned the art of camouflage. People always perform this little ritual, the desperate checking and rechecking, like reality will back down if you act persistent enough. But reality is stubborn, and then I saw him, the boy. The same one who had asked about games earlier, now gripping the tablet in its cartoon case, as though he had just claimed victory in a scavenger hunt. His mother walked beside him, calm, unhurried, the picture of innocence. Relief washed over me. This would be easy. Approach politely, explain the mix-up, and retrieve the tablet. I caught up with them, wearing the kind of smile you put on when you're about to ask a stranger if you can borrow their phone charger. "Excuse me," I said, pointing at the tablet. That's mine. The mother smiled back, but not the kind of smile that says, oh, of course. It was the kind that says, I don't know what you're saying, but I hope it isn't contagious. We had a language barrier. I pointed to myself, then to the tablet, then back to myself. If you've ever played charades with someone who refuses to guess, you know the humiliation. She turned to the boy. He clutched the tablet tighter, his face screwing up into that dangerous pre-cry expression children use like a warning siren. I recognized it immediately. I'd seen toddlers in grocery stores wrap themselves around candy bars with the same ferocity. Only this time, the candy bar contained my wife's ebooks and credit card logins. For a moment, I thought this would still end quietly. She'd speak to him, he'd hand it over reluctantly, and I'd return to the worst coffee money can buy. But the boy's little warning siren went off, first a whimper, then full-body sobs. The mother froze, wearing that fixed parental smile, the one that pleads silently with the universe. Please, don't let this become a spectacle. And that's when he arrived, the father. Some people enter a room, others storm it. He was the second type, 5'4" of pure fury, emerging from the cafeteria line like a general late to battle. He jabbed a finger at me and barked in broken English. What are you doing? What are you doing? His voice rose with each repetition, as if sheer volume might transform theft into ownership. He didn't look at the tablet, or the child, or the mother, only me, the villain in the scene he was determined to star in. My son is not a thief! You leave! He shouted again and again, occasionally seasoning the performance with racist, as if it were a spice he was worried about wasting. And that's how what should have been a 2-minute misunderstanding turned into a cafeteria melodrama, with me cast as the antagonist and a battered Samsung tablet as the prize. The man entered like an understudy who'd decided the show couldn't possibly go on without him. 5'4", finger extended like a cheap prop, he launched straight into his lines. What are you doing? What are you doing? Each repetition was louder, as though sheer volume might convince everyone in the cafeteria that shouting counted as evidence. He didn't glance at his son, who clung to the tablet like a flotation device on the Titanic. He didn't look at his wife either, her smile frozen in place like a mask from a discount Halloween shop. No, all his energy was directed at me, the designated villain in a drama I hadn't auditioned for. My son is not a thief. You leave, he barked again before tossing in racist, like an afterthought. It wasn't a debate so much as a broken karaoke machine stuck on repeat, minus the music that might have made it tolerable. I tried explaining, calmly, that I just wanted my tablet back. It was like explaining taxes to a cat, lots of blinking, no comprehension. Each time I spoke, he simply cranked up the volume, adding more finger jabs for emphasis. If outrage burned calories, this man would have qualified for the Boston Marathon. Meanwhile, the boy's crying had risen to the pitch of a fire alarm, with dying batteries shrill, endless, impossible to ignore. People started staring, and in that moment, I realized how bad the optics were. Me, standing over a sobbing child, hands out, while his father shouted accusations of racism. To strangers, I didn't look like a man calmly reclaiming property. I looked like the guy stealing candy from a toddler in full view of his horrified parents. That's one of life's cruelest tricks. The person in the right almost always looks terrible in public. It's why people who break up bar fights end up mistaken for the aggressors, or why I, with my wife's outdated Samsung, had somehow become the face of oppression in a hospital cafeteria. The father kept at it, his voice swelling and collapsing like bad opera. The crowd leaned in, hungry for spectacle, and I, idiot that I am, kept trying to look reasonable, steady voice, calm posture, hands at my sides. The kind of thing yoga instructors recommend, as if measured breathing can ever compete with full-blown hysteria. And right as I told myself that calmness might finally pay off, salvation appeared, or so I thought. Security had arrived. When the security guard arrived, I nearly applauded. Finally, someone in uniform, someone with authority, someone who could put an end to this cafeteria opera. He walked toward us with the deliberate stride of a man who'd spent years practicing looking official. The badge gleamed on his chest, his walkie-talkie crackled faintly, and I thought, yes, the cavalry is here. It took roughly 30 seconds for my optimism to die. The father switched languages, launching into a rapid-fire stream of Hindi, gesturing wildly like a man narrating a particularly violent puppet show. The mother nodded along at intervals, while the boy shrieked, clutching the tablet with sticky determination. I stood there, mute, like a confused exchange student waiting for subtitles. The guard listened intently, nodding in all the right places, and then turned to me. "Step aside," he said. "Let them leave." I blinked. Surely he'd meant to add, "after they hand over your property." But no, he doubled down. "You harassing. If you don't move, I call police." It was surreal. A stranger had taken my wife's tablet, and now I was the criminal. If Kafka had written hospital dramas, this would have been the pilot episode. I tried, as patiently as I could, to explain. "I'm not harassing anyone. That's my tablet. Look at the case, it has cartoon animals. Do I look like the kind of man who buys cartoon animals for himself?" The guard frowned, unimpressed. He looked back at the family, who were still in full performance mode. More Hindi, more frantic gestures, more nodding. It was obvious none of this was for me, but the guard behaved like he had front-row tickets and couldn't afford to miss a single line. Then he looked at me again, harder this time. "Move aside, or I restrain you." And that's when it hit me. I was seconds away from being physically dragged out of a hospital cafeteria for trying to stop someone from stealing. My inner voice, the same one that warns me about gas station sushi, whispered, "Congratulations, you're about to get arrested for owning cartoons." I don't know what broke me more, the guard's smug certainty or the father's face, stretched into the kind of victorious grin people usually reserve for lottery wins. Something in me snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically, more like the sound of a rubber band giving way. "Fine," I said, voice steady. "But when I call your boss, you'll be the one explaining why thieves get escorted out while the victims get threatened with arrest." For the first time, the guard hesitated. His eyes flicked down to his walkie-talkie. He was prepared for me to argue, maybe even shout. What he wasn't prepared for was me reaching for my phone and dialing directly. Working late nights has its perks. You learn which numbers to call. The guard's expression went pale as the line connected. He probably imagined I'd get patched straight back to him, where he could deliver the "I am the manager" routine he'd been rehearsing. Instead, I skipped the middleman and went straight to his supervisor. And that was how Dave entered the story. Dave was not the kind of man you called unless you really meant it. He was the head of security, an ex-cop with the expression of someone permanently unimpressed by human behavior. If the regular guards strutted around like mall cops rehearsing for a low-budget action movie, Dave was the grizzled character actor who shows up halfway through the film to tell everyone they're doing it wrong. When his voice came through the line, steady and clipped, the guard standing in front of me paled. It was the look of a child caught eating paste, shame mixed with confusion about whether paste counts as food. I explained the situation to Dave in brisk detail, sprinkling the guard's name in every other sentence like salt on an overcooked meal. Theft, shouting, accusations of racism, the works. The father was still behind me, gesturing wildly, his voice rising in Hindi like an auctioneer selling livestock. The boy, meanwhile, wailed into the tablet case, as though it doubled as a pillow. And the guard, my supposed savior, just stood there, wishing he were anywhere else, possibly even dental surgery. Dave didn't waste time. He confirmed with the camera room that yes, the child was carrying a tablet that wasn't his, yes, I'd tried to retrieve it calmly, and yes, the father had turned the cafeteria into a community theater version of Les Miserables. Then Dave's tone shifted. He barked an order, short and sharp, and suddenly the radio on the guard's chest crackled with life. Other guards were moving. The family, who thought they were seconds away from a clean getaway, had just been upgraded to detain at exit. I hung up and looked at the guard, who was now sweating like a man, watching his search history projected onto a large screen. "Feel like getting me my tablet back now?" I asked. He didn't answer, he just bolted for the exit, his shoes squeaking against the linoleum like a cartoon character fleeing a crime scene. I called my manager to let him know I'd be delayed. His response? Laughter. "Take your time," he said. "Keep me posted." It was oddly reassuring to know that while my day unraveled into a soap opera, somewhere upstairs my manager was laughing into his coffee. Minutes ticked by. Around us, the cafeteria tried to resume normal life. People returned to their sandwiches, but not without throwing curious glances at me, the accidental star of the lunchtime floor show. A woman with a tuna wrap gave me the same look you'd give someone who insists they've been abducted by aliens, half pity, half suspicion. Then, in a flurry of radio chatter and heavy footsteps, the security team reappeared. They weren't escorting me out, as the first guard had threatened. No, they were herding the family back in, their expressions ranging from defiant, the father, to resigned, the mother, to utterly miserable, the boy. It should have felt like triumph, the cavalry finally arriving with my stolen property in tow. Instead, it felt more like the intermission of a play I hadn't wanted tickets to in the first place yet. Somehow, I was still the main act. They came back like a parade nobody had asked, for 2 guards flanking the mother, the boy still wailing, and the father marching proudly in the middle as though he'd just returned victorious from war. The only thing missing was a brass band. Instead, we had the squeak of rubber soles and the faint slosh of cafeteria soup. When confronted, the father did not cave. No, that would have been far too reasonable. Instead, he did what I can only describe as the toddler strategy. If you can't have the toy, no one can. He yanked the tablet from his son's hands and hurled it to the floor, with the kind of dramatic flair usually reserved for reality television contestants flipping tables. The crack was immediate and final. The screen shattered, the case warped, and somewhere in the distance I swear I heard my wife's sigh of disappointment echo through the universe. For a moment, the cafeteria went quiet. Even the boy stopped crying, mesmerized by the destruction of his short-lived prize. It was as if we'd all witnessed a ritual sacrifice, except instead of a goat, it was a battered Samsung. One of the guards bent down, carefully scooping the remains into a plastic evidence bag. Watching it was oddly humiliating, like seeing your underwear retrieved from a lost and found bin. The father puffed out his chest, still muttering in broken English. No proof, not yours, not yours. His logic was that of a magician, insisting the rabbit had never existed, despite the pile of fur at his feet. And yet, when the word police was mentioned, his bravado wilted. Justice, in its most bureaucratic form, had spoken. The father argued. The officers yawned, and the rest of us pretended to care. You could almost hear the collective thought, well, at least it isn't me this time. The police showed up, looked at the remains, glanced at the cameras, and wrote everything down with the weary expression of people who had been summoned for far pettier things. They issued the father a fine and a charge for theft and destruction of property. He protested, of course, insisting it was an iPod and therefore irrelevant. At this point, I almost admired his commitment to being wrong. Meanwhile, the boy sat slumped in a chair, hiccuping softly, as if the weight of his father's theatrics had finally crushed whatever joy he'd gotten from swiping my tablet in the first place. His mother kept her eyes down, silent, probably wishing she could dissolve into the beige cafeteria walls. It should have felt like vindication, but really, it was just exhausting. What could have been a 5-minute teachable moment for a child had stretched into hours of melodrama, property damage, and enough paperwork to qualify as a part-time job. And not even the kind with benefits. The official word was theft and destruction of property. The unofficial word was, congratulations, you've just wasted 3 hours of your life. The police handed me a case number, the kind printed on carbon paper that smudges your fingers, as if the ink itself wants to remind you that justice always leaves a stain. Dave, ever the professional, filled out an incident report for me. He did it with the brisk efficiency of a man who'd seen far worse actual fights, stolen cars, the occasional drunk trying to nap in radiology. Compared to that, my case was basically a sitcom episode, the kind where the laugh track plays every time someone trips over a chair. You'll still get paid for the time, Dave assured me, and I nodded gratefully. Nothing makes a tedious ordeal feel better than knowing you're on the clock. If only we could invoice life for every hour wasted in pointless arguments, most of us would retire rich. The father, meanwhile, was standing off to the side with the expression of someone caught trying to shoplift a ham, defiant, humiliated, and still convinced the world owed him something. His wife remained silent, eyes fixed on the floor, while the boy had finally cried himself into hiccuping silence. They stood there like extras, waiting for the credits to roll, until the officers finally nudged them off stage. The police wrapped things up with the kind of tired efficiency you'd expect from people who had a real city full of actual crimes to attend to. One officer muttered something about paperwork, the other nodded, and together they shepherded the family out like shepherds who'd long since stopped liking sheep. When they were gone, I sat back down in the cafeteria, staring at the evidence bag containing what used to be my wife's tablet. There's something depressing about seeing your belongings turned into exhibits. It's like realizing your favorite sweater has been downgraded from clothing to evidence of poor judgment. Around me, life in the hospital returned to normal. A doctor balanced a tray of soup, A nurse laughed at something on her phone, and the cafeteria staff announced that Jell-O cups were 2 for 1. My little melodrama had ended, but only for me. For everyone else, it had been just another intermission before dessert. I should have felt vindicated. The thief was charged, the property documented, the system technically worked. But what I mostly felt was tired in that way you feel after arguing on the internet for too long. Sure, you won, but also, did you? The prize was exhaustion, and unfortunately, it came without a gift receipt. A few days later, just when I thought the whole ordeal had been filed away under unpleasant cafeteria memories, my phone rang. It was a lawyer, not mine, sadly, but one representing the family. His tone was polished, professional, and just slightly desperate the way waiters sound when they try to sell you the fish special at 10 p.m. He explained that the father's actions might affect future visa applications, and wouldn't I consider writing a letter to help smooth things over? I nearly laughed. This wasn't a cultural misunderstanding. This was theft, shouting, tablet smashing, the sort of universal behavior you don't need subtitles for. Some things really do transcend culture. Entitlement, for example. Instead of a letter, what I received was a check. Enough for my wife to buy a top-of-the-line replacement tablet and every peripheral accessory she had ever secretly wanted but never justified: cases, stylus, screen protectors in bulk. She beamed. Justice, apparently, was neon pink and came with Bluetooth. I, however, was left wondering what the father had learned. If the lesson was scream loudly enough and someone else pays the bill, then I suspect he'll be fine. But if it was meant to be about consequences, well, good luck explaining that to a man who once argued my Samsung was actually an iPod. The father faded into paperwork and police records, but the guard still had to face me in person. The security guard, the first one, the one who nearly had me arrested, showed up a week later with an apology letter. He handed it to me like a child returning a broken toy to a neighbor, face pale, voice quiet. The letter was full of sincerity, the kind that comes right before probation. Dave had clearly made sure the message landed. I shook his hand and accepted, because sometimes forgiveness is less about grace and more about wanting to go home for dinner. In the end, I bought myself another Kindle, a simple, unassuming rectangle that does one thing: books. No games, no bright cartoon cases, nothing to lure sticky-fingered children or theatrical fathers. It was, in its own way, a return to peace. But the memory lingered. Every time I see a child eyeing my Kindle, I brace myself for the parade, the shouting, the plastic evidence bag. Because once you've had your property destroyed in the middle of a cafeteria opera, you never quite look at Jell-O the same way again. Which is a shame, because Jell-O was the only honest thing in that cafeteria. In the weeks that followed, people kept asking me about the incident as if it were a dramatic story worth retelling. And in a way, it was, but only if you enjoy listening to a man complain about cafeteria coffee while his property is destroyed by a stranger. Friends leaned in eagerly, expecting scandal, suspense, perhaps even a fistfight. What they got instead was me describing carbon paper smudges and a grown man yelling iPod at the police. The truth is, most real-life dramas don't have the neat arcs you see in movies. There's no soaring music, no final monologue, no redemption. Just paperwork, headaches, and the faint sense that you've accidentally auditioned for a play that should have closed in previews. My wife, of course, came out of the ordeal the happiest. She had a new tablet, all the shiny accessories, and a story to tell her friends about how her husband had gotten into a cafeteria brawl over cartoon animal cases. To her, it was amusing. To me, it was exhausting. Her laughter became the soundtrack, while mine was the silence of someone calculating how much ibuprofen he had left at home. Marriages survive on balance. One partner laughs, while the other wonders how much caffeine a human body can reasonably endure. As for me, I keep the new Kindle close, tucked in a plain black cover. It has no games, no bright colors, nothing to attract attention. It is the introvert of electronics, and that's exactly what I want. When strangers see me with it, they don't ask questions. They assume I'm just another boring adult, which is the perfect disguise. And yet, sometimes, when I sit in a cafeteria with my Kindle, I catch myself glancing around, half expecting the parade to march back and the boy clutching, the father shouting, the guard nodding like an enthusiastic extra. Trauma has a way of turning into comedy when enough time passes, but the body still remembers. Mine remembers every squeak of rubber soles and every spoon clinking against soup bowls as the chaos unfolded. In the end, The story became less about a broken tablet and more about how ridiculous people can be when given a stage. Entitlement doesn't need translation, it speaks louder than any language, and the sad, funny truth is that everyone watching probably forgot the whole thing by the next day. Everyone except me and maybe the Jell-O, because unlike the rest of us, Jell-O never pretends to be anything it's not. Which, come to think of it, makes Jell-O the most honest witness I had that day. A week after everything settled, I found myself back in the same cafeteria. Different day, same soup smell. I had my new Kindle with me, wrapped in its plain black cover, and I was determined not to repeat history. I guarded it the way people guard national secrets close to my chest, eyes darting around suspiciously at anyone under 4 feet tall. That's when a nurse walked past, glanced at the Kindle, and said, "Oh, is that the new iPad?" I almost choked on my coffee. Of course. After all the shouting, the police reports, the evidence bag, and the settlement check still, to the casual observer, my modest Kindle was just another iPad. It turns out, no matter how much chaos you survive, strangers will still casually mislabel your trauma as consumer electronics. I wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. Instead, I smiled weakly and said, "Yes, the newest model, it only does books." She nodded, impressed, and kept walking, while I sat there wondering if maybe the father had been right all along. Maybe everything really is an iPod, or an iPad, or whatever people decide to call it in the moment. Identity, after all, is just branding. And my branding, apparently, was man who gets into cafeteria brawls over cartoon electronics. I sipped my coffee, tightened my grip on the Kindle, and decided that if anyone tried to take it again, I'd simply hand it over, because, honestly, I'm not sure even Jell-O could testify a second time. It had already given its best performance.